Mid lane has always been the heart of League of Legends. It's the shortest lane, closest to everything, and often the one lane that decides how a match unfolds. It's where the carriers clash, the egos grow, and the nightmares begin.
Oh my God! Your shockwave will find them all! And SKT, with a hell of a response, will take down 4.
If a top laner messes up, maybe your tower falls. If your mid laner messes up, the entire map cracks open. But here's the thing, mid lane hasn't always been the same. In fact, it's probably the role that changed the most over League's lifetime. From mages in Season 1 to assassins, control mages, roamers, and even bruisers, mid lane has seen every archetype rise, dominate, and fall. And with every season came new changes. Items, runes, jungle influence, champion kits, vision systems. Pro meta shifts. There were times when Zed was mandatory, when Orianna was eternal, and when you couldn't survive without a roaming Galio or scaling Kassadin. And man, I loved playing my Kha'Zix mid. So today, we're going deep. From 2009 to 2025, this is the complete history of the mid lane. Back in 2009 and 2010, League of Legends was a completely different game. Back then, mid lane belonged to mages. The first dominant mid champions were Annie, Veigar, Morgana, Ryze, and Sion. Yes, AP Sion. Why? Because they had all one thing in common: point and click burst. Annie had her full combo up every wave. Veigar's stun was massive. Ryze had ridiculous mana scaling, and Morgana could 2v1 just by sitting under tower with her W. Mechanically, it wasn't that complicated. Whoever hit level 6 first usually won the lane. Whoever backed and bought a needlessly large rod first had kill pressure. If your combo landed, you one-shot someone. If it missed, you backed and did it again in 30 seconds. And because junglers were barely a thing, mid laners had way more space to farm, poke, and scale. There were games where no ganks happened for 10 minutes straight. Instead of map rotations and pressure plays, mid was mostly a raw stat check. You picked a mage, pushed waves, and burst people on cooldown. And let's not forget, Flash had a 3-minute cooldown, and people would still sometimes take clarity. There was also the famous Season 1 NA strategy of putting your AD carry mid and AP top. Something that seems crazy now, but back then it was viable just because mages were better with long lanes and blue buff was game-breaking. Riot hadn't decided what role should go where, and players were figuring it out as they want. If your mid laner had blue buff and the enemy didn't, that was it. The lane was over. Mana was so scarce and so important that teams would funnel blue buff into their mids frequently. And since there were no jungle timers shown in-game, you had to manually track respawns or lose priority forever. By late Season 2, a few trends started creeping in. Kassadin became notorious. Gragas mid emerged, Fiddlesticks was an actual mid pick, Riot started introducing more mobile mages and mana-efficient AP kits, and that shifted the landscape little by little. But for these early years, mid lane was still all about raw mage damage, farming for level 6, and begging for the jungler to give you blue buff. This blue buff generosity stayed for a little longer as well. I still remember asking it far in Season 3 and Season 4. It was simple, and it laid the foundation for every mid lane war that came after. By the time Season 3 rolled around, League was no longer just a casual MOBA experiment, it was turning into a serious esport. Riot was pushing ranked hard, the first World Championship had already wrapped, and more players were learning how to actually play the game properly. Laning got cleaner, warding became more common, and team comps became more refined. And in mid lane, the mage monopoly was about to be broken. This was the age of assassins. Zed, Talon, Fizz, Katarina, Kha'Zix, Akali. They weren't just viable, they were oppressive. These champions didn't farm for late game, they farmed you. They roamed, they all int the second they hit level 6, and if you messed up even slightly, you were gone. There were a few key reasons this meta took over. Reason number 1, the Deathfire Grasp era. Ah yes, DFG, a beloved item that turned every assassin and burst mage into a one-shot machine. It gave AP, cooldown reduction, and most importantly, a targeted nuke that amplified all magic damage taken for a few seconds. You didn't just kill someone, you melted them. Pick LeBlanc or Annie with DFG, Flash Tibbers, DFG, QW, Ignite, dead in 1 second. Mid lane wasn't about safe farming anymore, it was about killing or being killed. Reason number 2, red elixir starts. In Season 3, you could start the game with Elixir of Fortitude, which gave bonus health and AD right at level 1. Combine that with an early Longsword or Doran's Blade, and suddenly Talon or Zed could just straight up dive you at level 2 or 3. Elixir starts led to hyper-aggressive laning. If you didn't have kill pressure, you didn't have lane control. Reason number 3, Black Cleaver rework. Season 3, patch 3.10. This one gets memed to this day. The new Black Cleaver gave health, AD, CDR, and flat armor shred per auto, which stacked. If you were Talon, Riven, or Zed, you built 2 of them and started deleting tanks with what was essentially true damage. Even some mid laners like Jace or Pantheon were abusing BC builds. It pushed the meta even further into one combo equals death territory. Of course, Riot couldn't let assassins run wild forever. In Season 4, they started pushing back. DFG was removed in early 2015, Red Elixir got nerfed, then removed, Vision became safer with trinkets and Sightstone making roams riskier, and more utility mages like Lulu and Orianna came back into the spotlight. But make no mistake, Season 3 and 4 mid lane were ruled by burst and kill pressure. The best mid laner wasn't the one with the most CS, it was the one who roamed bot at level 6 and picked up a double kill with Ignite. Standout champions of the era were Zed, the poster boy for mechanical outplays, shadow jukes, and montage clips. Kha'Zix, stealth, gap closer, damage, escape, pick one, he had all of them. Fizz, one of the few champions that could delete a carry and escape even under tower. Talon, silenced you, jumped your wall, and you were just dead. Mid lane was his playground. The assassin meta changed the mid lane forever. It forced people to learn to ward better, to track roam timers, and to respect burst damage like never before. And although this era wouldn't last, it created some of the most iconic 1v1s and solo queue dominance we've ever seen. Chapter 3. Control mages and wave clear rule everything. By the time Season 5 kicked off, the era of raw assassin dominance was winding down. Vision became easier to manage thanks to trinkets, warding totems, and Sightstone becoming standard on supports. Riot nerfed DFG into oblivion and then deleted it altogether. Talon's silence was removed, Zed's damage tuned, and the elixir starts that once made lane a deathmatch were gone. And so, just like that, the tide turned, and control mages took over mid lane. If Season 3 and 4 were about high-risk, high-reward burst, then Season 5 and 6 were about wave clear, scaling, and map control. You weren't picking champions to kill your opponents anymore, you were picking champions to out-tempo them. If you've been around League for long, you know that when Orianna starts showing up every game, something's changed. She didn't win lane by killing you, she won by never dying, always having push, and scaling into a teamfight monster. Orianna, Xerath, Ziggs, Lulu, Anivia, Syndra, and even Lux. These champions became the meta, not because they killed better, but because they farmed safer, cleared waves faster, and outscaled their lane opponents. In 2015 and 2016, Riot started really leaning into macro play. Wave states, rotations, and objectives became the main win conditions. You weren't winning mid by solo kills anymore, you were winning it by shoving waves, roaming for vision control, and TP flanks. Remember, teleport mid was also meta for a while, especially in pro play. Riot nerfed its cooldown refund later, but during this period, some mid laners took TP instead of Ignite, because being on time for Dragon or Baron was more important than having kill pressure in lane. In Season 5 Worlds, Victor, Lulu, and Orianna were top tier. LeBlanc was still picked, but she needed jungle help to snowball. In Season 6 we saw the rise of Azirs, Ryze, and Vladimir. All champions who scaled hard and had major AoE threat. Why? Because teamfighting and wave control were the dominant macro tools. Even champs like Malzahar and Talia emerged, not because they were flashy, but because they could clear wave safely, rotate with semi-globals, and lock down targets in teamfights. Season 6 also saw a rise in Grasp of the Undying, Iceborne Gauntlet, and Cinderhulk Jungle. That meant longer fights, more peel, and less room for burst champions to one-shot anyone. If your mid laner couldn't shred tanks or contribute meaningful CC, they were just not worth picking. This in turn made mid laners prioritize consistent DPS, Cassiopeia, Ryze, utility and control, Lissandra, Orianna, and zoning tools, Anivia, Azir. So what happened to assassins? They were still around, in solo queue mostly, but in competitive play they were nearly gone. Too risky, too easily countered, and too reliant on snowballing. Mid became more about safety, setup, and scale than style. It wasn't as flashy as the Assassin days, but this era shaped the foundations for modern mid lane theory. Wave priority equals map control equals objectives equals wins. Roamers, bruisers, and the death of mid lane identity. By the time Season 7 came around, something strange started happening in the mid lane. It wasn't about assassins, it wasn't about control mages, it wasn't even about 1v1s anymore. It was about whatever champion could get out of lane the fastest. Mid lane was still mid, but its role was starting to blur. Wave clear was still important, but what you did after you cleared the wave became the real win condition. Champions like Talia, Aurelion Sol, and Galio exploded in popularity, especially in pro play. Why? Because they could clear waves safely and then roam with powerful semi-globals. Talia cleared waves with Q, ulted bot, and aimed for a double kill. Aurelion Sol literally ignored you in lane and just flew to side lanes. Galio could TP with his ult form halfway across the map and turn 2v2s into 3v2s instantly. This meta deprioritized kill pressure mid, and instead turned the role into a playmaking hub. You didn't win mid by killing your lane opponent, you won it by ignoring them entirely and winning bot lane instead. Then came the real twist, Riot's new rune system. Runes reforged, preseason Season 8, changed everything. Keystones like Conqueror, Fleet Footwork, and Electrocute meant that non-traditional mid laners suddenly became viable. Not just in solo queues, even in pro play. Mid lane saw Irelia mid with Conqueror, Darius mid in cheese comps, Yasuo and Yone as regular picks, Renekton mid to counter squishy mages. It wasn't just poke and wave clear anymore, it was skirmishing power, early all-ins, and rune abuse. The term mid laner no longer meant mage or assassin, it could literally mean anything that could fight well in the river and join jungle 2v2s. This era caused a lot of mid lane purists to lose their mind. Where was the art of lane control? Where was the chess match between Orianna and Syndra? Where was the elegance? Instead, players were getting dove by top laners mid because they could abuse bruiser kits and Conqueror. And even worse, many of these picks worked because the game was speeding up. Early dragons, fast tower plates, jungle tracking, you had to fight early and often, and if your mage couldn't handle a Renekton at level 3, well, good luck. This might sound random, but the removal of Tracker's Knife in Season 8 was a huge deal for mid lane. Vision became way harder to manage, which made mid-jungle 2v2s and roam even more important. If your mid couldn't help your jungler contest scuttle or invade, your whole early game fell apart. So again, champions that had mobility, dueling power, and early threat became king. This was the era where mid lane stopped being mid lane and started being support jungle second lane. You didn't pick a champ for lane matchups, you picked it for what it brought to the early fights. And for better or for worse, it worked. But it also opened the door for even weirder mid lane metas to come. Scaling, safety, and the Azir Victor era. After the chaos of Season 8, bruisers mid, roaming junglers, and early game brawls, Riot started tuning the game toward more structure and scaling. The jungle got nerfed, early snowballing was toned down, and turret plating meant that wave control and lane presence mattered again. And when the dust settled, two familiar faces were sitting comfortably at the top of mid lane, Azir and Victor. By Season 9, and especially Season 10, mid laners with scaling potential, safe laning, and teamfight power were back on the menu. Azir, excellent wave clear, huge late game impact, strong scaling. Victor, After receiving item reworks and hex score removal, his scaling became even smoother and more flexible. Orianna, Syndra, Zoe continue to exist in the standard pool. If you needed control, poke, or pick potential, they were still there. The biggest difference from the past was how much mid laners were expected to scale, not roam. Roaming was still valuable, but most comps now expected their mid to show up at 25 minutes with 3 items and solo carry fights. This era also introduced one of the biggest disconnects between solo queue and pro meta in League's history. In solo queue, Yasuo, Yone, Zed, Qiyana, Sylas, they were still everywhere. Assassins thrived on low coordination and solo kills. People didn't care about 3 item scaling, they wanted level 6 kills and highlight plays. In pro play, Syndra stun setups, Orianna ball control, and Azir shuffles were all that mattered. You picked mid for objective fights, wave control, and neutral setup. If your champion couldn't control space or contribute on 3 item spikes, they weren't viable. Season 10 also gave us a massive item overhaul. Mythic items were introduced in Season 11, but previewed late Season 10. Liandry's, Ludens, and Everfrost created clear build identities for mages. Control mages gained tools to shred tanks, apply constant DPS, or lock down mobile threats. This actually helped mid lane diversify a little again. Not back to Season 3 chaos, but enough to see Cassiopeia, Swain, Seraphine, and other off-meta picks have moments. Still, the goal was the same. Survive lane, farm efficiently, and scale into late-game damage machine. This was also the height of the slow-down LCK style of League, especially in 2019-2020. Games often went 35+ minutes, with teams waiting for soul points, baron fights, or Elder Dragon to force action. As a result, the best mid laners were those that could stay even no matter the matchup, provide constant DPS, and not get caught out in rotations. That's why even during metas with Assassins and Bruiser still viable in theory, the safe, slow-scaling control mage remained king, at least in the competitive world. Mythic mayhem and mobility creep. If the Azir Victor era was all about structure and scaling, Season 11 and 12 flipped the table. Riot's mythic item overhaul hit the rift like a meteor, and with it came a new generation of mid laners. Suddenly, burst damage was everywhere. Every champion had a dash, and control mages started feeling kinda outdated. When mythic items were introduced in Season 11, Riot gave each role powerful identity-defining items. For mid lane this meant Luden's Tempest, burst mages loved it. Instant combos, more mobility. Liandry's Anguish, great for DPS control mages like Cassiopeia and Swain. Everfrost made champions like Ahri, Sylas, and Lissandra playmakers with instant CC setups. Crown of the Shattered Queen, Season 12, let squishy champs survive burst and play front-to-back teamfights. Mythics weren't just items, they were a second identity for your champion. If you took Everfrost, you were a pick setup champ. If you took Crown, you were saying, I'm gonna get jumped on and live. Suddenly, item choices mattered more than ever, and certain champs skyrocketed in viability based on what Mythics enabled. Riot also pushed mobility-heavy reworks and releases during these seasons. Ahri's rework, Season 12, gave her sustain and reset potential. Sylas continued to be dominant, often abusing Everfrost. Akali, Qiyana, LeBlanc started returning in force in solo queue. Vex tried to punish mobility and ironically got outpaced by it. Mid lane became less about zoning and more about snapping forward, deleting a target, and resetting the fight. Even control mages had to adapt. Victor built Ludens for more movement. Orianna had to flash R aggressively. Cassiopeia, once immobile, found success again because she could out-DPS the divers if played perfectly. One of the quiet creeps of this era was Bruiser showing up mid. Again, Yasuo and Yone abused Shield Blow plus Death Dance builds. Zed, Aurelia, and Sylas all thrived thanks to Goredrinker, Conqueror, and Rune synergies. Swain's rework, Season 12, turned him into a drain tank beast, viable mid and top. Mid lane felt like the most open role in the game. You could play poke, engage, tank, sustain, assassin, bruiser. As long as you understood your matchup and roamed well, you could make anything work. But with all this variety, the mid identity was more fractured than ever. Even though control mages were still solid, the tempo of the game had increased. Early dragons and skirmishes mattered more. This made early impact champs like Sylas, Victor, LeBlanc, and Vex much more attractive. If you couldn't fight for Scuttle, rotate for Dragon, or show up to bot lane dives by 7 minutes, your pick risked falling behind. This pushed slower scaling mids like Azir or Anivia further out of the meta, unless paired with a jungle that could stall tempo or force 5v5s later. Season 11 and 12 mid lane were chaotic. Kits were bloated, damage was high, and itemization dictated identity. It was fun for players who loved snowballing or mechanical outplays, but punishing for anyone who fell behind. And yet all of this would lead to an even greater shift, when Riot removed Mythics entirely. The return to roots, post-Mythic mid lane. By the end of Season 12, the community was getting tired. Mythic items had warped the game for over 2 years. Champion identity often felt tied to an item, not to the champ itself. If your mid pick couldn't use Everfrost or Liandry's well, it probably wasn't viable. If you were a burst champ and didn't build Ludens, you weren't doing enough. So Riot did something drastic. At the start of Season 14, they removed the Mythic system entirely, and it changed mid lane more than any other role. Without Mythics, mid lane returned to its fundamental strengths. Laning phase mattered more again. Power spikes came from champion kits and item combos, not forced Mythics. Builds were way more flexible. You could go Ludens into Deathcap, Liandry's into Zhonya's, Rod of Ages into Cosmic Drive, whatever made sense for the game. Suddenly, the classic mages started creeping back in. Orianna, Anivia, and Cassiopeia thrived off strong scaling and adaptable builds. Ahri, Lissandra, and Sylas still maintained high pick rates for their playmaking and teamfight control. Even Vel'Koz, Xerath, and Malzahar saw windows of viability, something that hadn't happened in years. Mid lane finally felt like a chessboard again, not a button-mashing arms race. But that doesn't mean mid lane was passive. If anything, Season 14 made jungle mid synergy more important than ever. Picks like Talia, Nidalee, and Syndra paired with aggressive junglers to form brutal 2v2 control. Annie, despite being simple, became an S-tier pick because she could hard push mid and dive bot at level 6 with her jungler. Naafiri, Riot's new simple assassin, even saw pro play for her ability to fast clear waves and chain roam. Riot's mid-patch balancing also allowed for more meta churn than in previous years. If a champ was strong for more than 2 patches, you could expect nerfs. This meant mid lane picks rotated weekly in both solo queue and pro play. In pro play, the mid meta settled into a dance between control mages and playmakers. Orianna, Azir, and Corki came back in style for teamfight and scaling. Ahri, Sylas, and Neeko remained the go-to for roaming and pick. Tristana mid popped up to abuse lane priority and hard push strategies, especially paired with early game junglers. There was no dominant archetype anymore. You had poke, you had dive, you had control, you had bruiser, and for the first time in years it all felt viable, assuming you knew how to use it. One of the more bizarre Season 14 trends was the rise of bot lane champions being played mid. Tristana, Kai'Sa, and even Ziggs became top-tier mid picks at various points. Their ability to shove wave, threaten towers, and rotate fast made them oppressive in coordinated play. Riot eventually had to step in and nerf wave clear on multiple bot laners to avoid mid turning into an AD carry role. Still, it showed how much the meta was open again, how mid could be anything if it fit your comp. So, where does that leave us now? What still works, and what's dead? We are now in Season 15, and after more than a decade of shifts, nerfs, reworks, and patches, mid lane has arrived at one of its most flexible states ever. But that doesn't mean it's perfectly balanced. If anything, the story of mid lane in 2025 is a story of adaptability, where you either evolve with the ever-shifting meta or you disappear completely. Despite all the changes over the years, a few champions have stood the test of time. Orianna, Syndra, Ahri, and Victor remain consistently viable, whether it's solo queue or pro play. Sylas, thanks to his flexible ult and broy playstyle, remains a menace in the right hands. Azir, though nerfed and gutted a dozen times, still sneaks into the meta when scaling becomes valuable. These champions succeed because they adapt. They are not bound to one item, one playstyle, or one meta. They can play for lane, for roam, for scaling, or for teamfight. That's what makes a modern mid laner strong. Not every champion survived the transition. Galio, once a roaming terror with Aftershock and Protobelt, struggles to find footing in a world of higher mobility and less burst-reliant kits. Talon, once king of snowball roamers, lost his bite with vision changes and early game nerfs. Lissandra, once everywhere during the Everfrost meta, now feels clunky without item lockdowns. And remember Zoe? She had her moment in the sun around season 8 to 10, but her reliance on pick setups and poke has pushed her into niche territory. Riot hasn't touched her much, and that's both a blessing and a curse. In pro play, especially in Korea and China, mid lane is all about early prio and push, roam windows, and scaling with utility. Picks like Jace mid, Nico, Tristana, Talia, and Syndra dominate because they control waves, pressure the jungle, and show up to skirmishes before their lane opponents. Assassins are still seen occasionally, like Sylas, Akali, and LeBlanc, but mostly as counters or pocket picks, not first priority. The meta is not defined by class anymore, it's defined by tempo. Whoever controls the first 10 minutes, through wave clear, jungle pairing, and smart rotations, controls the game. In solo queue, flexibility is everything. Off-meta picks like Ziggs, Brand, or Yasuo mid can dominate based on player skill and matchup knowledge. Roaming mids like Kiana and Neferi still work, but only if you understand when to leave lane without griefing farm or tempo. Scaling mages like Anivia or Kassadin thrive in lower elos where jungle pressure is inconsistent and games go long. You can still one-trick your favorite champ, but if you're not adapting builds, runes, or playstyle, you're trolling. In many ways, mid has come full circle. It's still the role that can carry the hardest, but also the one that collapses the fastest if you fall behind. You get ganked more, rotated on more, and expected to roam, control objectives, and scale all at once. The mid meta in Season 15 rewards players who track jungle, know their matchup, adapt builds every patch, read tempo windows, and understand side lane pressure. Gone are the days of brain-dead wave clear and sitting mid for 30 minutes. Today's mid laners are lane generals, map roamers, and teamfight anchors all rolled into one. Mid lane has never stopped evolving. From Kassadin teleporting around the map in Season 3, to Syndra one-shotting ADCs in Season 7, to the modern tempo mids that feel more like junglers with better wave clear, this role has never stood still. It's where the highest highs and the lowest lows happen. One season you're the hero solo carrying every fight, the next you're 2 levels down wave clearing under tower praying your top laner doesn't die again. That's just how it is. But no matter what Riot does, no matter what patch, item change, or jungle rework comes next, mid lane stays central to League's identity. It's the heart of the map, the brain of every macro decision, and the soul of every teamfight. So whether you're picking your comfort Ahri, locking in your cheese Zed, or mastering the latest wave clear utility meta, just remember, mid lane doesn't follow the meta, it becomes the meta.